Mr. President, I rise tonight to speak of my colleague, Senator Specter, who tonight cast his 10,000th vote as a member of the United States Senate. So we watched history tonight. And sometimes when we have a chance to witness history, of course, we look forward to his many more votes, but also to look behind us at some of his own personal political history, but as well as his service here in the U.S. Senate. I'll offer a few remarks tonight about his service. I can say that after knowing him for many, many years, and especially after serving with him for now more than 3 years, I can say if you go down that list of votes, all those roll call votes over many years, serving the people of Pennsylvania, he's had one priority with those votes. Those votes were cast on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania. He has always been an independent voice for the people of our state, has fought a lot of battles for the people of Pennsylvania. And I know the people of our Commonwealth are proud of his service. His public service began after he became a lawyer. He went to the University of Pennsylvania and then to Yale Law School, and then eventually joined the district attorney's office in Philadelphia. He rose through that office and became the district attorney of Philadelphia, elected twice and served 8 years. He was elected to the United States Senate in 1980 and was reelected 4 times after that. Reelected in 86, 92, 98, and 2004. So those years of service as a United States Senator. And of course, it's more than about years and about votes. It's certainly about the substance of those votes, fighting those battles. Whether it was for the veterans of Pennsylvania, we've had 1 million or more veterans for many, many years in our state, those who fought our wars, those who worked in our factories, those who went on to build Pennsylvania, gave their first measure of devotion to the country, fighting on battlefields. He's always fought for them, chaired the Veterans Committee here in the Senate, and continues those battles on behalf of the veterans of Pennsylvania. On health care, we could talk for a long time about the battles he's fought over and over again. Not only the battles he fought in the last year or two as the issue is being debated here in the Senate, but especially the battles he fought over many years. Battles on behalf of children and women, battles for health care for the vulnerable, those who are poor and may not have a strong advocate other than their senator or member of Congress. So he's fought battles on health care. You could isolate a lot of different issues under that general heading, but one that comes to mind for me is the National Institute of Health. No one that I know of in the United States Senate has fought more battles for the National Institutes of Health, I should say, and all of the research that comes from the great work done there, and all the cures, all of the ways that people are saved because of that research at NIH. Battles that he's fought on job creation, not only to preserve and protect and create more jobs at a time of recession, like the horrific recession we've been living through and our workers and our families have been suffering through, but battles over many years. Battles for the rights of workers to organize and collectively bargain, battles to make sure that jobs are kept in Pennsylvania instead of going overseas or somewhere else. He's fought those battles to protect our workers and our jobs. Battles about national defense, making sure that we're doing everything possible to keep the people of our Commonwealth and our country safe from foreign enemies, safe from terrorists, and safe from those who seek to do us harm. Over many years, Arlen Specter has cast those votes as well, keeping us safe and keeping us strong. His independence is something that is critically important to any state, but especially a state like Pennsylvania. We have a state of over 12 million people. We have a lot of different regions in our state, a lot of different constituencies, and a lot of different challenges all across the state. What the people of Pennsylvania expect their senator or senators to do is to try their best to fight their battles, to try to remain an independent voice for them, not for some special interest in Washington. And Arlen Specter has done that for years, being that strong, consistent, independent voice for the people of our state. He has had a strong sense of justice from the time that he was a young lawyer, through his service as a prosecutor, making sure that our streets were safe in Philadelphia, and really what he's done here in the United States Senate, fighting battles for justice every day of his service here in the Senate. And finally, in a very broad sense, but a very important sense, not only when times are tough like they are now economically, but even when times seem good, even when the budgets are better and people don't seem to be as concerned about what the federal government can do to help them through a difficult period. Even in those times of prosperity, he has always fought for our workers and for our families. So it's very easy for me to stand here as someone who has watched him over the years in his service in the Senate, and now as someone who has served with him for more than 3 years. Very easy for me to say, without any effort at all, that those 10,000 votes that he has cast have been votes on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania, and I believe for the best interest of the people of the United States of America. So I want to commend Arlen on that tremendous vote total. I want to commend him also for his public service, his enduring public service for the people of Pennsylvania. And I also want to commend his family, who I know has supported him, his wife Joan, and his family for many, many years to make sure that he could help us serve the people of Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Arlen.
Mr. President.
The senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I thank my distinguished colleague, Senator Casey, for those very generous remarks. He and I have worked together for the past 3 years plus, but beyond that, we have worked during his tenure as a statewide officer holder, as Auditor General and Treasurer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I have not only worked with Robert Casey Jr., but I worked with Robert Casey Sr., his distinguished father, who was governor of the state. And while we were waiting for the train to arrive, this is an unusual evening in the Senate because the Acela was late and it had a number of senators coming from New York and points north. And the train was about an hour late, so the vote was kept open for their arrival, and we had a chance to reminisce about some of our experiences in the past. When I first met his father as a young state senator and a candidate for governor, when I was district attorney of Philadelphia, and reminiscing about a controversial report that his father, as Auditor General, made in 1970 on welfare problems. And it was very controversial. And although we were at different parties at that time, I backed up Auditor General Casey because I was DA and I knew that he was right. And when his father was governor, I was a frequent recipient of calls on the need for some assistance for Pennsylvania, and the answer was always yes. So I'm delighted to be his colleague in the Senate, and I thank him for those remarks. While waiting for the past hour, I have been reflecting on the 10,000 votes that I have cast. I just said to Senator Casey, gave me a unique time where I had nothing else to do except to wait for some senators to arrive to vote on the late train. And I have made some notes about those reflections. And since Senator Menendez arrived on the train and has some comments to make, and I told him I would yield to him. And when he has finished his statement, in the absence of any other senator seeking recognition, I intend to reflect on those 10,000 votes. So people who think C-SPAN is about off, if you're interested, wait. I again thank Senator Casey and defer to my colleague, the distinguished senator from New Jersey. And now, Mr. President, I've come to the point where no other senator is seeking recognition, and we've expedited the work of the clerks, and I'm going to make a statement reflecting on the 10,000th vote. The circumstances are somewhat unusual. I cast the vote and expected to depart the chamber, but I found my distinguished colleague, Senator Casey, prepared to make some comments about my 10,000th vote. But he could not make those comments for about an hour because the train was late. And some senators hadn't arrived. The vote was kept open. So in a very unusual situation for me personally, I had nothing to do but to sit and think. And I was reflecting upon the 10,000 votes. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. And I would not expect the senator from Illinois to stay to listen to this because it might delay his arrival at the gym, which is very early tomorrow morning. I will be there at about 6:30 a.m., and I don't know how long he will have been there, but for quite a while. Thank you, Senator Durbin. The occasion of reflecting on 10,000 votes in the United States Senate is something I've been thinking about for the past hour plus as we awaited senators to arrive to vote, and then having yielded to two other senators. And I thought about why I got into public life, why I decided to run for office. And that's hard to say, but I believe it was at the inspiration of my parents. My story is a common one. Immigrant parents, father served in World War I, was wounded in action in the Argonne Forest, carried shrapnel in his legs until the day he died, and was one of the veterans who was promised a $500 bonus. And the government reneged on the promise, did not pay the veterans the bonus, as the government reneges on so many promises to the veterans. And there was a famous march on Washington during the Hoover administration when I was a child. And President Hoover called out the Army, and they fired on veterans and killed veterans, one of the blackest days in American history. And I think that event, as a young child, was emblazoned in my mind, and I saw how the deep anguish of my father and mother, too. This was in the Depression. And my father had always had a very deep concern about government because he lived under the tyranny of the Tsar. And the Tsar wanted to send him to Siberia when he was 18 years old in 1911. Then he immigrated to the United States. And I think that experience motivated me to want to go into public life. And I'd always had a very deep concern about civil liberties as a member of a minority group myself, to be able to deal with that issue in a governmental capacity. The 10,000 votes have come and gone in a hurry. And I was reflecting on the Reagan years. I was elected in 1980, the same day that President Reagan was elected. And there are many highlights of the tenure during his 8 years, but I think especially about September 17th, 1987, and that's an easy date to remember because it marked the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution of the United States. And to commemorate the 200th anniversary, there was a ceremony in Philadelphia. And President Reagan went to Philadelphia to participate in the ceremony. And he invited me to go with him. He had invited Senator Hines as well, but Senator Hines had other commitments that day and did not go. And it was a fascinating experience to travel alone with the president, talk to him on Air Force One, talk to him in the presidential limousine. And when we arrived at Independence Hall, they had a great wheel. And the wheel started with George Washington, the first president, and then John Adams, and all the way around until it came to Ronald Reagan, right next to George Washington. And he and I talked about the drama that he experienced on the wheel right next to President Washington. On that particular week, we had the confirmation hearings of Judge Bork for the Supreme Court of the United States. And September 17th, when I traveled to Philadelphia with the president, it was a Thursday, and I missed my opportunity to question Judge Bork. And I got that opportunity on Saturday morning, and I was the only one there, and had, or at least there were only a few people there, and had an opportunity to question Judge Bork for an hour and a half, and ultimately played a key role in the rejection of the nomination of Judge Bork, who believed in original intent and had a very, very different view of the Constitution. Did not believe in due process of law. That was not part of the Constitution, and he disagreed with the incorporation of the 10 amendments through the Due Process Clause to apply to the states. And that was a momentous Supreme Court hearing. During the years of President George H.W. Bush, there were many matters of note. One that stands out was the confirmation proceeding as to Justice Souter. And when Justice Souter was up for confirmation, and I participated in that as a member of the Judiciary Committee, as I had participated in the confirmation of Judge Bork, the pro-choice groups were apprehensive about Justice Souter, about Judge Souter becoming Justice Souter. And I examined his record very carefully and thought that he would read the precedents of Roe versus Wade in a favorable light, and supported his confirmation. And then he became a stalwart for a woman's right to choose, and a stalwart for constitutional principles involving civil rights and individual freedom. During the years of President Clinton, I chaired the Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, Human Services, and Education. And at that time had an opportunity to take the lead in increasing education funding very substantially. Pell Grants were raised very materially. They had been at $2,400, and the committee then moved them up, and now they're in excess of $5,000. Also took the lead in helping the working men and women through funding for the Department of Labor, and for the National Labor Relations Board, and for mine safety, OSHA, and MNCHA. And then on the funding for health, as has already been noted, took the lead with the concurrence of Senator Harkin, who was then minority ranking member, to increase funding for the National Institutes of Health from $12 to $30 billion. And during the decade I chaired the committee, that enormously increased the availability of grants. Some years as much as $3.5 billion were added to the funding of the National Institutes of Health. And then when the stimulus package came up, I offered the amendment and led the battle to add an additional $10 billion. NIH had slipped back because of across-the-board cuts and failure to have cost of living adjustments. But the $10 billion in the stimulus package has provided 15,000 grants and has stimulated the interest in a whole generation of scientists. And as Senator Menendez commented a few moments ago, talking about my 10,000 votes, how those research grants have led to enormous savings of prolonging of lives and saving of lives on many strains of cancer, and research into heart disease and autism and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, with enormous strides being made. During the administration of George W. Bush, again, many momentous events. Just to mention one, because time is running, I led the fight for embryonic stem cell research, the Specter Harkin bill, to use federal funds to use stem cells, which had enormous potential for curing the maladies of the world, a veritable fountain of youth, by injecting stem cells into diseased cells. President Bush vetoed the Specter Harkin bill, vetoed it twice. But now with President Obama, there has been an executive order, and Senator Harkin and I are continuing to push for legislation, because legislation has more permanency than an executive order. An executive order can be changed by the next president. And then the Obama administration of President Obama got to know Senator Barack Obama, had his office down the corridor from mine on the 7th floor of the Hart Senate office building. And when he came forward with his proposal for a stimulus, and I took a look at what was happening on the economy, I was concerned that we would slip back into a 1929 depression if we did not pass the stimulus bill. And I voted for the stimulus bill, and on this floor, commented about the political peril, and it has had a profound effect on my political life, which I will not discuss here. But had the stimulus package not been passed, I think we would not have been in the Great Recession, which we are in, but we would have been in another Great Depression. And my own state, Pennsylvania, has received $16 billion. Without that funding from the stimulus package, there wouldn't be unemployment compensation paid today. There wouldn't be Medicaid paid today. Has the potential for 143,000 new jobs. It's only halfway through the cycle of 2 years, passed in mid-February, not even a year old. And we see the financial problems of California. Well, where would California be without the stimulus? Where would any of the states be without the stimulus? And the stimulus package and other proposed federal expenditures has caused quite a public reaction, so that there is great concern in America today with what is going on in Washington. And people are very concerned, as am I, about the deficit and about the national debt. And we're going to be called upon to raise the national debt again. When I was elected to the Senate, the national debt was $1 trillion. During the tenure of President Reagan, those 8 years, it increased to $3 trillion. President Reagan was the great economizer on his fiscal policies. But we have no choice when it comes to raising the debt, because if we don't raise the national debt, we will be in default. And the debt is being paid for many obligations, including the support of our troops in Afghanistan, which I will comment about in a few moments. And in the spring of this year, April, May, June, July, there was tremendous worry about what the federal government was talking about spending. $1 trillion on health care reform, $1 trillion on cap and trade, on climate control, and great public opposition arose to what was happening in Washington, and it was promoted by the gridlock which is present in this chamber, spoken about by Senator Menendez and Senator Lautenberg a few moments ago. by the filibusters which are being carried on by Republicans. Well, a few years ago, filibusters were being carried on by Democrats, and President Bush's judicial nominees were the subject of filibusters. And the business about filibusters and about gridlock is a problem on both parties. It isn't, it's a matter of bipartisan blame. And it is my hope that we will find more senators. Senator Menendez commented about my willingness to reach across the aisle, and I did that on the other side of the aisle, and I do that on this side of the aisle. When I came to the United States Senate in 1980, there were many moderate Republican senators who reached across the aisle. We had Senator Hatfield from Oregon, just discussing the distinguished presiding officer brought me greetings from Senator Hatfield, senator from Oregon, and Senator Packwood, also a moderate from Oregon, Senator Danforth from Missouri, Senator Weicker from Connecticut, Senator Chafee from Rhode Island, and Senator Stafford from Vermont, Senator Warner from Virginia, and Senator Hines from Pennsylvania, and Senator Mathias from Maryland, and I could go on and on and on. Well, today the moderates on the other side of the aisle, with my departure, can fit in the telephone booth. And it's not good for the Senate, and it's not good for the country. And when I undertook the town meetings this year, I've made it a practice in my tenure in the Senate, 30 years, to visit almost every county almost every year. And the first county I went to in August, first day I had an opportunity to travel when the Senate was not in session. Usually when I got to Lebanon County, there were 85, 100 people. On this occasion, there were 1,200 people. They had the live television transmission units from MSNBC and Fox and CNN. And there was enormous anger about what was happening in America with the spending, what was happening with the deficit, what was happening with the national debt. And those are problems which we yet have to face. I get the question in my candidacy for re-election. I'm seeking a sixth term. I want to follow then Senator Biden, the most recent six-term senator. Well, people say, why run now? Why, after serving for 30 years, being the longest-serving Pennsylvania senator, people notice I have a big birthday coming up. I was born on February 12th, the same day as Lincoln's birthday. I was born 121 years after Abraham Lincoln was born. That's as close as I'll come to talking about age. I believe with Satchel Paige, the great baseball pitcher who was ageless. And Satchel Paige made many famous statements. One of his most famous statements was, if you didn't know your age, how old would you think you were? And I choose 37. And I choose 37 because nobody would believe 17. That was a happy year in my life. I think there's a psychological term called arrested development. That may have occurred to me at 17. But why run now? Well, because there are so many things to be done. There are so many important problems. And the experience and the seniority and the knowledge, I think, can be put to good use for the 12 million constituents I have. And there's a great facet on term limits. It's called losing at the polls. And the people can say yes or no to a candidacy for re-election. But I'm full of vim, vigor, and vitality, and there are a lot of things I want to do. And the 4 granddaughters are very much on my mind, as will their children and their grandchildren be. And we have health care reform, which is still pending in the Congress of the United States. And it has been a very, very difficult matter, which has consumed this body and the House of Representatives for months The House can pass it more quickly than can the Senate, and we worked on it for the better part of 6 months. And we passed here, and it's well documented that it took 60 votes because there wasn't a single Republican who would support cloture. There had to be 60 Democrats who would agree, and that led to a lot of concessions being made to get the 60 votes. Some senators insisted on special consideration for their states, and I think that was wrong. So why did I vote for the package? Because the good vastly outweighed the bad. I was asked in Pennsylvania, why didn't I get some special consideration for Pennsylvania? Well, I didn't because I thought it was the wrong thing to do. I was on a radio program last week, and critical radio program for what's going on in Washington, but I got a compliment for not asking for special consideration. Well, we have a new senator-elect in Massachusetts, and we ought not to do anything in the interim until he is seated, and then there'll be 59. So not enough to shut off a filibuster by the Republicans. So the question is, where do we go from here? President Obama has talked about a number of alternatives. Week ago, last Wednesday, after the Massachusetts election, he was talking about a pared-down bill. I doubt that that could pass the Senate. It would be unfortunate if all the work that has been done on the historic health care reform were to be nullified. The health care bill ran into great problems because of misrepresentations. There are no death panels in the health care bill. On my town meetings, people were talking about death panels, and I told them authoritatively and accurately there were no death panels. There was a worry about a government takeover of health care. Well, that wasn't the bill. There was a government option. I was for a robust government option, but leaving the private sector in place, but taking steps to give a choice to people who wanted to buy insurance, but to get insurance reform, to eliminate pre-existing conditions as a way for insurance companies to maneuver and decline to pay claims, or the cancellation of insurance when somebody got sick, or not covering children, so many of the insurance lines. And I think it would be unfortunate if all we did was nullified. One way to approach it would be for the House to pass the Senate bill. That would be my recommendation, and then to have immediate corrective legislation on a number of the points which went too far, on the special favors for certain states. I believe there would be support on the other side of the aisle, and we could correct the abusive practices if the House was to adopt the Senate bill. But I respect the House. I've read what the Speaker has to say about the disinclination to adopt the Senate bill. But it has been a long time in coming to get reform, and legislation which is enacted is subject to modification, and it has to move in steps. We could only get to the 1965 Voting Rights Act because you had the 1957 legislation and the 1964 legislation, so that there's opportunities for changes. And the abusive facets and the wrongful revisions of the Senate bill, if taken by the House, could be corrected. And I think there would be support on both sides of the aisle for that. There are a great many items on my agenda. One of the concerns I have is the issue of imports, illustratively from China, where they are subsidized and take unfair advantage of the trade laws. And I've appeared many times before the International Trade Commission, something I had done in private practice as a lawyer on appellate arguments and in court, won a big case preserving a lot of jobs several months ago on the tire industry, stopping China from sending tires into the United States, which were subsidized. Won a big case in the ITC that I was the lead advocate on the steel industry to stop China from selling steel in the United States. Been working on a project to deepen the Port of Philadelphia from 40 to 45 feet. Senator Hines and I got authorizing legislation in 1983. Took until 1992 to get the Corps of Engineers to say that it was economically sustainable. Then I have worked on the Appropriations Committee with my seniority to get more than $77 million appropriated. It's been contested by the state of Delaware on environmental concerns, which have been answered totally by environmental impact studies. And recently, we were successful in getting the Secretary of the Army to invoke the Supremacy Clause. But there's still more work to be done on that. Working hard for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, working on manufacturing a vaccine. We've been short of vaccines, and we can't rely upon foreign sources. That is a multi-million-dollar project working and has the promise of thousands of jobs for that area. Working on Northeast Pennsylvania to get a train from Scranton to Hoboken on Wall Street West. Working for the farmers on milk dairy processes with General Electric to keep the GE plant open and jobs there. Working for my position on the Environment and Public Works Committee on climate control. Working on immigration reform. As chairman, I managed the bill through the Senate in 2006. Working on the issue of campaign finance reform. The Supreme Court last week came down with the decision to allow corporations to engage in political advertising to elect or defeat candidates, which will, as Justice Stevens in dissent pointed out, open the door for widespread corruption. And I'm considering the issue of a constitutional amendment which would reverse that decision and allow Congress and states to set limits on campaign finance. I've been working for a decade to try to get the Supreme Court televised for transparency. They make all of the cutting-edge decisions. Been very active on foreign policy. Many things I am working on at the present time. Within the last month, made a trip to Afghanistan and Syria and India. And my study of the situation in Afghanistan leads me to oppose the president's plan to send 30,000 additional troops. I think we have to do whatever it takes to fight al-Qaeda because they are out to annihilate us. But why fight them in Afghanistan when they can just as easily organize in Yemen or in Somalia or elsewhere? And the efforts to get help from the Pakistanis not being very successful. In India, our congressional delegation met with Prime Minister Singh, and I put the question to him, would he be willing to have a limitation with Pakistan on the number of troops on the border, which would liberate Pakistani troops to help us fight al-Qaeda in Pakistan? Prime Minister Singh said he would if the terrorists would be stopped from coming into India as they blew up the hotel in Mumbai, more than a year ago. So there are many things to be done. Our congressional delegation visited in Syria. I have visited the Mideast almost every year during my tenure in the Senate, very much concerned about the security of Israel. And in the visits that I've had to Syria, I've gotten to know Bashar Assad, the president of Syria, and his father, Hafiz al-Assad. And I have made many trips to Syria because I believe Syria is the key to the peace process there. Syria wants the return of the Golan, and only Israel can decide whether Israel wants to give back the Golan, but it is a different era today than it was in 1967 when the Golan was so important strategically. Today, rockets obviate the defensive posture of the Golan Heights, but only Israel can decide that for itself. But if Israel could get concessions for Syria to stop destabilizing Lebanon, to stop supporting Hamas, to stop supporting Hamas, that is an issue which ought to be considered. Well, the hour is growing late. We're keeping staff here, but I thought this occasion on the 10,000th vote, as I said, I sat here for about an hour waiting for the vote to end before Senator Casey could make his comments. Gave me a few moments to reflect on why I was interested in running for public office originally, what those 10,000 votes have meant to me, with a very brief statement as to some of those votes during the administrations of President Reagan and the first President Bush and President Clinton and the second President Bush and President Obama, and what I'd like to see done in the future. And there is much to be done on so many lines. I said to Senator Casey, who's been here only 3 years, I'd like to be here to speak of him on his 10,000th vote. I don't entertain that seriously, but the issues that I've talked about are ones that are very important to me, and I think to the future of my state and the future of my nation.